available, but that's only helpful if you know how to read. So that all changed when the 20th century happened. Basically, with advances in mass communication, audiences have been exposed to a flood of narratives heretofore unseen. Tales told in so many ways very quickly in a scope beyond what they've ever experienced before. With moving pictures, telecommunications, the internet, streaming services, the luxury of access to stories is now a common utility. Thanks to on-demand services made widely available, time and space are no longer barriers to entry to experience anything whenever you want. For decades, we've been viewing and telling and retelling our tales to millions, and have told those tales again to create their own voices. Art has become a conversation between everyone around the world, creators and viewers. Our unifying language is media. There are citizens in countries who have never lived in a democracy but can tell you every beat of the latest Avengers movie. It's a new age for storytellers, one that's both exciting and intimidating. These new global audiences have seen so many stories that they've become savvy to the tricks of the trade. They can figure out what's coming next. They crave what's familiar, but also what's new. Stories that are bold and reinvent the genre, but are also accessible and remain clear. So how do you cut through the noise and write a story worth telling? It may be intimidating to try and create for this new international story-literate landscape, but don't worry. Deep down, the fundamentals remain the same because mediums change, but stories do not. What has begun, and what has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. Ecclesiastes. Oftentimes, young writers have told me they believe stories must be original and created by some pure genius of a legendary author in order to be good. Well, I'm afraid I got news for you. Nothing is original. Everything has been done. Even the most outlandish, incredible, totally unique artist you've seen has been inspired by, or is reacting to, or is directly ripping off what has come before him. In cultural studies, this is sometimes called the Great Conversation. Every author is building off what's been done before, consciously or not, and having a dialogue with the ideas of our intellectual and artistic forefathers. Our culture is a massive swaying tower of inspiration, always aspiring to something greater, but ever reliant on its predecessors. Or another way of putting it, if I have seen further, it's by standing on the shoulders of giants, which was Isaac Newton, although ironically he stole that quote from somebody else a few centuries earlier. No matter how hard we try, we're plagiarizing the past, and that's okay. We understand where we came from, and that gives a starting place to have a new discussion on what it means to be in the here and now. Adding your voice to this centuries-long conversation is how we as artists communicate with the world at large. The hero's journey. In epic storytelling, something that often comes up in any writer's room is the idea of the hero's journey. Popularized by Joseph Campbell, it's the concept that all stories in every culture share a common shape of a hero venturing into the unknown, facing their demons, making great sacrifices, and returning with newfound knowledge. Campbell's version had a lot more to it, with moments like refusing the call, meeting with the goddess, atoning with the father, being born again, yada yada yada. But it's all pretty complicated, but the basics hold true. In television, this has been adapted by screenwriter Dan Harmon into what he calls a story circle, where each episode encapsulates a mini hero's journey. The hero starts with a want, or starts in a familiar place, but has a want or need. So he ventures out into the unknown, gets what they want, but pay a heavy price, learn from it, try to atone, and then return home having changed. So basically, that all it really is the story that we all undergo, which is like whenever you're discovering something new, you just go into like an unfamiliar place, try something, fail, pay a price for it, and then come out the other side having grown from it. This general storytelling convention can be applied to nearly all stories, from the Epic of Gilgamesh all the way to Zootopia. An epic involves someone taking a risk, stepping out of their comfort zone in hopes of attaining something, whether it's conquering the complexities of high school existence, or proving they can make it as a cop in the big city, or defeating an ancient evil that lurks beneath their otherwise idyllic suburban town. The hero's journey is always involved the protagonist in discovering they must grow in ways they didn't realize, by reaching for something, grasping, but making sacrifices along the way. When all hope is lost, they dig deep within themselves and root out the fatal flaw that led them astray, then fight to make things right. We're all on a hero's journey of sorts, dreaming of some distant goal, reaching towards an ambition that will require great risk and uncertainty to achieve. But if you're willing to take that trip into the unknown, you may come out the other side having grown into something new, something stronger, something ready for the next adventure. Infuse your characters with this, and you'll always be telling a great story. Yes, all stories are the same, and our audiences know them well. So you may be asking, what will set your story apart and make them stand out from the rest? Part 4, finding your voice. All of us have to learn how to invent our lives, make them up, and imagine them. If we don't, our lives get made up for us by other people. Ursula K. Le Guin. So, write what you know. Common adage that you may have heard. It's useful advice, but it's often misinterpreted, I find. As a starting point, it can be helpful to dig into your own past and focus on what makes your experiences relatively unique to the world at large. Something that is deeply personal to your own journey, that may be uncommon in the public eye, and express your voice to a wider audience of what's important and essential in our global community as it grows, and more avenues to communicate that message avail themselves. But that's not to say that the only stories you're allowed to tell with confidence are about your childhood growing up in Texas or Mexico. Your past can and will influence everything you do, but a better way to understand the phrase, write what you know, might be, write what you know to be emotionally true. For instance, I'm a genre writer, which means the stories I tell involve experiences I've never had, fantasy and monsters, wizards fighting trolls, swords and sorcery, science fictional elseworlds. Obviously I've never experienced any of that. So how do I know a story will resonate with my audience if it's about something as alien and different from my own personal journey? And the answer is deceptively simple: metaphor. Ideally, a metaphor that speaks to a shared aspect of what it means to be us, to be human. Draw from your personal experiences, the people you know, the joy and suffering you remember, and run them through the filter of the extraordinary circumstances of the story you're trying to tell. For instance, Lord of the Rings was an epic saga about a band of heroes who set out to defeat the forces of Mordor by destroying a magic ring in the fires of Mount Doom. But it was also the story of Frodo, a young man who grew up in a peaceful bubble, blissfully unaware of the troubles of the outside of his comfortable home. But he's forced out into the scary unknown and must do what's right when no one else would. It's a story of isolationism and power and a person putting their ideals on the line and standing up for them. I don't know about you, but that sounds a lot like the transition from childhood to adulthood. Things turn out to be a lot more complicated than you thought. And while you may be okay, other people out there might be suffering, and it's up to you to make a choice to fix the problems that our generations past did not. Good stories work that way. You can zoom from the micro to the macro, and there's something meaningful at every level, reflecting backward, telling us something about human relationships and the world at large. That brings us to part 5, plot versus story. And here's a little quote from my boss, Guillermo del Toro. Plot is the rhythm, story is the melody. Now, what he means by that. When writing a story, it's important not to get caught up in the details that you lose sight of what makes it meaningful to your characters, and by extension, your audience. Many people assume a good story is based on a great idea alone. I've heard many tales of young writers, new to the craft, who are paranoid about their incredible one-of-a-kind logline being stolen, a single sentence that's sure to be their ticket to the big time, even though they haven't actually written a word of it yet. The truth is, good writing isn't about interesting stuff happening. If anything, that's a hallmark of bad writing. Good writing is about emotional consequences for interesting characters. For instance, if a stranger enters a bank and lights a stick of dynamite on fire and shouts, "I have dynamite, I'm gonna blow up this bank," and then your hero springs into action to stop him, and then Dynamite Guy is never mentioned again, you might think that's a pretty bad story, not a great scene. You'd be asking, who's Dynamite Guy? Why did he do that? The lack of motivation is distracting to the drama. However, if Dynamite Guy enters a room and says, "This bank took everything from my family, and heroes like your protagonist did nothing, so I'm going to change that with a bang," suddenly we have something to go off of, a villain with a vendetta. Maybe not a lot, but at least we have motivation. We have a theme, and we have some kind of mysterious connection to our main character. What I just described is meant to highlight the distinction between plot and story. Plot is the action occurring and why, while story is what it means to your characters. Famously, Alfred Hitchcock didn't care what the actual plot of his movies were. In fact, his heroes often pursued things that ultimately proved to be meaningless. What he was more interested in was following the story, the thrills of a man who must make an impossible choice when he's mistaken for a spy, or someone who's with a broken leg who thinks he witnessed a murder out in his rear window. What the spies were actually up to in North by Northwest didn't really matter nearly as much as the behavior of the hapless ad executive played by Cary Grant, who's accidentally thrust into a dangerous world of espionage and struggles to find a way out of it without compromising his morals. Another way of putting it, plot is the stake writers give the guard dog while the burglar does his business. Now, obviously Hammett isn't being literal about breaking and entering. He's being metaphorical about how writers have to be a bit sneaky and how they get their audiences to feel things. They use the plot to distract the audience just enough so that they can manipulate your emotions without you noticing. They get you wrapped up in a story enough that you suddenly care about what happens to the characters and have to see what happens next to them. And before you know it, even the toughest moviegoer is bawling his eyes out at the end of Coco. A few other examples. Die Hard. The plot is a cop fights terrorists who have taken over a skyscraper, but the story is about John McClane reconnecting with his strange wife at her office Christmas party. The Star Wars trilogy. The plot is the Rebel Alliance battling for independence against the Empire, but the story is about a farmer named Luke who realizes his deadbeat dad isn't beyond redemption. Toy Story. The plot is a toy cowboy who's replaced by a fancy new action figure. But the story is about, with the help of his rival, Woody, the wooden cowboy, realizes there are things that are more important than being the favorite, such as being there for one another. And finally, the plot of The Wizard of Oz is about a girl who crushes someone with a house and teams up with a band of social outcasts to kill again. But the story is a fun fantasy romp about friendship. All right, part 6, ands, buts, and therefores. Another key... 1 minute? Oh, okay. Let me skip ahead then. Holy cow. Okay. You know what? Let's just skip to the end. A few final words then. Creating something from nothing is a difficult skill to learn. Few things strike fear to the hearts of writers like a blank page. But I promise it's far from impossible. Just knuckle down and do the work. It can be intimidating to take the leap, but I embolden you to do it all the same. Don't be afraid to fail, because we all do. I certainly have. But when the universe beats you senseless and crushes your dreams, all you can do is get up and try again. The world needs your voice. Throw yourself back into the grind and let it be heard. Speak a little louder. Find your words, choose them carefully, and unleash them on the world. We need you now more than ever. Success is where luck meets preparation. Go out and knock on doors until your knuckles bleed. You'll hear a lot of no's over and over and over again. I did. But the reality is you only need one yes, and then the door is thrown wide open. I encourage you all to venture forth in the unknown. Make cool things with cool people, and surround yourself with people more talented than you. Be kind, work hard, take the plunge, make sacrifices, and grow. Then return home as a conquering hero. All of you have a story to tell. How you tell it is up to you. Good luck. Thank you so much. I don't know if we have time for Q&A. Or we do? Okay, great. So yeah, I don't know if there are any questions about myself or my career, or just about the craft of screenwriting, but I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Yes? That time just flies by. Wow.
Hi, thanks for your lecture.
Sure.
I have a very simple question.
Yes.
How anyone knows when you find your voice? What are those
Qualities.
things? Yeah, qualities.
Yeah. I would say, sometimes when you're writing a story, there's a temptation to chase whatever is popular right now. You see what's on the air, like, oh, that movie was popular, so I'll just do whatever is other people are doing. And I think finding your voice is really about just sort of like, what makes you laugh? What makes you excited? And ideally something that you haven't seen on TV or in movies or in books. And you pursue that. And then when you take the opportunity to put yourself out in the world in a very vulnerable way like that, and then somebody responds to it and say, I've never seen this before, this is really great. I think that's when you know, oh, I've tapped into something. That's not to say that just doing something different is automatically going to be success. But what it is you need to try something different and cultivate it and take feedback and then find how that sort of unique perspective or sensibility fits into the global audience that you're trying to reach. And it'll take a little bit of trial and error, but I think eventually when you find people coming to you and saying, this is great, I've never seen this before, then you'll know that you found your voice.
Tenemos tiempo para dos preguntas más. Okay.
Hi, I admire you and your work a lot. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
It's always been my dream to write at DreamWorks, and I wanted to know if there's something you wish you knew before you started, or if there's something that's like a key for me to guide myself to get there.
To work in DreamWorks or in animation, I would say, always make sure that you're writing something that feels like it should be animated. That's one thing. It's like sometimes people will think that means they have to make it childish or dumb, and I don't believe that at all. What it means is just like things are just a little heightened. And, it means that you're telling bigger, bolder stories, usually epic stories. And what it really means for DreamWorks especially is it's about finding the heart. You can have the comedy, you can have the laughs and the jokes and the cool action fights, but really it comes down to, and that's what I was trying to impart today, is like it's about finding your character and finding the emotional reactions of your characters and trying to say something about friendship and learning and understanding something new about a world and each other. If you do that and just try your best to seek your own voice and add something new to the conversation, then I think you'll be definitely on your way.
Una pregunta más. Última pregunta.
Yes.
At what age do you find your greatest story or one of them?
Like, what age did I write my best story?
Yes.
Oh gosh, I don't know if I have written my best story yet. I think it was in college when I really started, when I was a kid, I would be in the backyard with a little video camera and making little movies and such. And I always had a passion for storytelling, but I think it was in college when I started performing some of this stuff for other people and actually showing my work to people outside of just like my close friends and realizing like, oh, there's something here. That's when I started to realize that I wanted to do this for a living. And that was a hard conversation I had to have with my dad, who wanted me to be a dentist and tell him, actually no, I want to move to Hollywood and pursue my dreams. And my parents were like, oh Lord, we're going to have to support him for the rest of his life. It didn't work out that way, and I count myself very lucky that I was able to find a tribe of other like-minded artists and really talented people at DreamWorks, who kind of shared my vision for just telling really unique and weird and fun and funky and strange stories. But you just keep making stuff. That's all. You never know what you can make until you try it. And the story will change. It'll tell you what it needs to be. And sometimes your story grows beyond you. Like some of the shows that I've worked on, like the audiences have made it their own, and the fandoms have sort of created this whole mythology unto itself, and that's okay. You let the stories grow beyond you, and then that suddenly becomes another thing that can inspire you, which is a very roundabout way of saying, like, you know, I like to think that I've written some very good stories, but I'm always looking to see how I can change and how I can be better. And it's the same with everybody. You never know what you can accomplish until you try.
Okay. Un aplauso fuerte, por favor, para Aaron Watkins. On behalf of Caseco, Black Labs Technology Hub, and Fundación Excel, I want to give you this reward.
Oh my gosh, thank
for
you
being
so
part
much.
of this, the biggest binational event, biggest binational innovation and entrepreneurship event in the border area.
Gracias.
Gracias a ti.
Thank you so much.
Muchas gracias. Vamos a tener una dinámica un poco diferente en este reset. Hay miles de personas, centenares de miles de personas afuera de este edificio, centenares de personas nada más, y todos quieren ser parte